Before the video begins, a special thanks to today's sponsor, Skillshare. If you haven't already checked out Skillshare, I'd highly recommend it, as it's an amazing online learning community with thousands of brilliant classes on virtually any topic, from productivity and drawing to photography and graphic design. A class that I have enjoyed in particular is Creativity Unleashed, Discover, Hone and Share Your Voice Online by Nathaniel Drew. This has helped me to think of fresh ideas, stay motivated, and maintain quality in my work. There's really no better time to get creative and learn new skills, and I believe Skillshare is an incredible way to do so. Also, signing up would be a great help to the channel. Make sure to check it out as soon as you can, because the first 1,000 people who use the link in my description will receive a 1-month free trial to Skillshare Premium. Hey everyone, today we are looking into the life of Ranavalona III, the last Queen of Madagascar. Like most of the African continent, the island of Madagascar was an independent nation at the start of the 19th century, governed by its own indigenous people. But by the end of the century, the island had fallen under French colonial rule. This is the story of the last Queen of Madagascar and her efforts to resist French encroachments. The woman who would one day become Queen Ranavalona III of Madagascar was born as Princess Ranavalona on the 22nd of November 1861 in the village of Unported near the city of Antananarivo. She was the niece of Queen Ranavalona II, who had ruled the Merina kingdom since 1868, and as such, young Ranavalona had a claim to succeed the throne. Princess Ranavalona was raised as a ward of the royal court and was given a Christian education, her aunt having adopted the religion of the Europeans who had spread out across Africa during the 19th century. An intelligent student, the princess was soon married at a young age to Andriana, a member of the Malagasy blood nobility, though this man, named Ratrimo, later died in a suspected poisoning. This was shortly before Ranavalona II died herself in the summer of 1883. She did not have a clear and direct successor, and as a result, Princess Ranavalona succeeded her aunt at the age of 21, becoming Queen Ranavalona III. Ranavalona became the ruler of a kingdom which was at a political and cultural crossroads in the 19th century. For centuries, Madagascar did not have a centralized unitary ruling power, but was divided up between competing peoples and small states. This began to change from the 15th century when the Merina or Hova people entered the central plateau of the island and established a small kingdom there. The Merina soon began expanding, in part owing to the organization of a vast irrigation system which allowed them to drain the local marshes and make possible the cultivation of large amounts of wet rice in irrigated paddies. With increasing crop yields, the flourishing Merina kingdom was able to support a great many number of people, as well as a more powerful bureaucratic state with a large army. From its inception, the Merina kingdom was headed regularly by queens rather than kings, a peculiarity by European terms, but a relatively normal feature of politics in the Indian Ocean at this time. One of these early rulers, Queen Rafohi, began expanding Merina rule out of the central plateau of Madagascar in the 16th century. Power of the state was further strengthened in the late 18th century, when King Andriana Mpoina Merina, or Nampoina, became the first Merina monarch to consolidate his power, while his armies, commanded by his son, Radama, managed to secure control over much of the highland regions of the island. The process of expansion was then in turn completed by Radama when he became king in 1810 and managed to make tributaries or vassals of the other kingdoms of Madagascar, thus largely uniting the remainder of the island under Merina rule. But just as the Merina kingdom was reaching the peak of its powers, a threat emerged from outside. European contact with Madagascar had been relatively limited until the 19th century, the climate and the prevalence of tropical disease making the island unwelcoming to potential arrivals from Europe. However, as elsewhere in Africa and Asia, the 19th century saw Europeans encroaching into the most wayward parts of the globe for the first time. As they did, native peoples had two options. They could try to maintain their traditional way of life and get quickly conquered and colonized by Europeans who arrived with guns and industrial technology, or they could attempt to adopt the culture of the Europeans in ways which would allow them to defend themselves. Radama chose the latter option and gradually began implementing a policy of westernization and modernization in Madagascar. This latter policy was quickly reversed though by his wife and successor, Queen Ranavalona III, who reigned from 1828 down to 1861, a possibly fatal move during a lengthy reign of over 30 years. Although her successors attempted yet again to modernize the Merina kingdom, it was not in a position to withstand any European nation which decided it wanted to take possession of the island. This was the situation which existed in Madagascar just as Ranavalona became queen in 1883, and just as the French began to take particular interest in the island. The young queen was crowned on the date of her 22nd birthday, on the 22nd of November 1883. Shortly thereafter, she concluded a political marriage with the Malagasy Prime Minister Ranavalona III. With the westernization of the Merina kingdom during the 19th century, the power of the monarch had been reduced, and increasingly, authority lay with a cabinet-style government of ministers. Thus, in the years that followed, Ranavalona would primarily play a ceremonial role in the Merina kingdom, while her new husband, the Prime Minister Ranavalona III, largely ran the government. Accounts of Ranavalona from the 1880s and early 1890s depict a woman who was strangely caught between two worlds. At royal ceremonies, she would be surrounded by the trappings of traditional Merina society, such as soldiers who fought with spears, but in private, she was a woman who had become accustomed to much of the court society of Europe. She played cards, would bring needlework and her latest crocheting project to cabinet meetings, and imported most of her clothes from Paris or London. But these outside influences had a sinister hue. For much of the 19th century, both Britain and France had viewed Madagascar as a target for colonization, with its rich natural resources and its strategic position on the sea routes of the Indian Ocean between the Cape of Good Hope in southern Africa and the Indian subcontinent. The island was of some significance. The French had been given concessions to exploit the mineral wealth and forests of Madagascar by Radama II, who ruled between 1861 and 1863, according to the so-called Lambert Charter. But when the Merina government attempted to revoke this in the early 1880s, this action became the pretext for French military intervention in Madagascar, right around the time of Ranavalona's succession. The resulting Franco-Hova Wars would last for the next 13 years. The First Franco-Hova War, or First Madagascar Expedition, began in 1883, with the dispatch of a small armada by the French to the African island. An ultimatum was delivered, and an expeditionary force bombarded the east coast and occupied Toamasina. This state of affairs lasted for 2 years, until a treaty was negotiated in January 1886, one which stipulated that the Merina government would pay a large indemnity and would allow a French representative to reside at Ranavalona's court in Antananarivo. This brought the First Franco-Hova War to an end. In the months that followed, Ranavalona was central to efforts to sidestep this treaty. For instance, the Merina government attempted to solicit the aid of the United States in preserving its independence by petitioning the sitting president, Grover Cleveland. However, her timing was not favourable, as America was beginning to embark on its own period of outright imperial expansion, and the problem was compounded in 1890 when the British and the French concluded an agreement whereby Madagascar was acknowledged as a French sphere of influence, in return for the government in Paris allowing London to take full control of the island of Zanzibar to the northwest of Madagascar. Hence, the Merina kingdom was isolated and without any powerful allies to call on when it was challenged yet again by France in the mid-1890s. The pretext for the Second Madagascar Expedition, or the Second Franco-Hova War, which erupted in 1894, was the failure of Ranavalona III's government to abide by the terms of the previous treaty of 1886. A small French naval expedition bombarded the harbour of Merina late in 1894, and this was quickly followed by the arrival of a large expeditionary force of some 20,000 French troops and auxiliaries in the early summer of 1895. The campaign which followed was a mixed affair. There was very little direct fighting between the French forces and those of Ranavalona. Nevertheless, thousands of French troops died from rare tropical diseases in the searing summer heat, including typhoid fever and malaria. Ultimately, the French were lucky. The expedition succeeded because it involved a significant contingent of Algerian and African troops who could function well in the climate of Madagascar, and also because the arrival of the expedition sparked a series of regional revolts against Merina rule throughout the island in the summer of 1895. Eventually, a bedraggled force of French soldiers surrounded the capital of Antananarivo and bombarded the city with modern artillery. This was enough to force Queen Ranavalona and her consort, the Prime Minister, to surrender. On the 1st of October 1895, a new treaty was signed between the Merina Kingdom and France, whereby the island of Madagascar essentially became a French protectorate. Initially, Queen Ranavalona III was allowed to remain as the queen of the country, and the Merina government remained in place, albeit as mere figureheads. Real power in the country now lay with a group of French colonial administrators. The exception to the act of clemency towards the Queen and her government was her husband, the Prime Minister Ranavalona, who was exiled to the French colony of Algeria in North Africa, where he died a year later. Ultimately, Ranavalona was also to soon leave Madagascar. A popular uprising against French rule broke out within months of the signing of the Treaty of Occupation. The Menalamba Rebellion was a largely rural revolt, which was as much fomented against the westernization and Christianization of the country as it was the French themselves. As such, it was not launched in support of or at the behest of the Queen. Nevertheless, it was enough to convince the metropolitan government in Paris that a change was needed. The Queen was deposed, the Merina Kingdom was formally brought to an end, and a military government was installed in Madagascar in order to administer the island directly for the French Republic. Ranavalona was now exiled to the small island of Réunion, lying some 550 kilometers east of Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. She was sent here with several members of her extended family, including her 14-year-old niece, Razafine Andrea Manitra, who was pregnant with the illegitimate child of a French soldier. When her niece died shortly after giving birth, the former queen adopted the baby girl and named her Ranavalona after herself. Thus, in her mid-30s and having lost 2 husbands, Ranavalona became an adoptive mother. The makeshift former royal family in exile was soon moved again. In the late 1890s, France ended up in a renewed conflict with Britain over the Sudan region. It was now considered imprudent to have Ranavalona on an island which was so close to Madagascar. Well, the British could conspire to return her to her homeland as part of a scheme to remove the French from the island. Consequently, in February 1899, the entire family was quickly forced to leave Réunion. They were taken nearly halfway around the world to the French colony of Algeria in North Africa. Ranavalona would live out the rest of her life here. In Algiers in Algeria, she was well looked after. The former queen was provided with a villa and household servants, as well as a sizable allowance. She would even be allowed to regularly visit Paris in the years that followed. As time passed, she adapted very well to the westernized way of life she found herself in, and yet Ranavalona never entirely forgot about her homeland. She petitioned the French government on several occasions to be allowed to return home, but these pleas were refused. It is doubtful that her request would ever have been granted, but a premature death ended any chance that it might be. On the 23rd of May 1917, she died suddenly of a severe embolism or blood clot at the age of 55. Though originally buried in Algeria, her remains were exhumed in 1938 and returned to Madagascar, finally bringing her back in spirit to her homeland, over 40 years after she was sent into exile. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching this video on Queen Ranavalona III. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave me a like and a comment down below. And if you're new, why not subscribe? If you have any suggestions, be sure to leave them down in the comments, or there are links to my Instagram and my email in the description. I hope my pronunciation wasn't too bad. I did try my best, but they were quite difficult, to be honest. And I hope you guys have notifications turned on so you get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.